But let's not have silence. Let's start talking. All right, so I'm going to show you something this morning. I'm going to show you my first car. Are you ready for it? This is my first car. Boom. Is it up? Boom. All right. I would give a round of applause. Come on. This car brings back a lot of memories for me. This is a 1979 Datsun 620. This pickup truck rocks, man. All right. And I'll tell you, I drove this car. If you add up how much I drove it over all the years, this is years that I drove it, I think the total time comes up to about 10 days. All right, so here's what happened. You ready for the story? So this is what happened. So I'm 15 and a half. You know, back then you could get your driving permit, or you could, this is in Washington State, get your permit, start learning how to drive. And my dad says to me, son, I bought you a car. All right, teenagers, give me a round of applause. Wouldn't you like it if your dad said that to you? Yeah, I bought you a car. He says, not only that, I bought you 2 cars. I was like, what? Why would you buy me 2 cars? That's amazing. He says, here's the thing. All right, here's the thing. One of them, the engine runs super sweet, but the wheels don't turn. And the other one, oh man, it can roll really great, but starting, not so much. So, son, we got a project here. Okay, now so this story is going to illustrate for us a couple things today. One, how a moment of mentoring in my life really changed a lot in my life. It helped make me who I am today. It's also going to show you one of the most embarrassing, gut-wrenching times in Pastor Isaac's life. Okay, so here's what happens. Me and my dad, we go nuts on this car. So we decide to swap. We're going to take an engine out of the car, right? We're going to unbolt everything. We're going to take both engines out. We're going to swap them. Right? And then we're going to have one working car. This was the plan. And so during this process, my dad, you know, there was a lot of stuff that I couldn't have learned about working on cars unless I had somebody right there with me. You know, you can learn from a book a lot of stuff about how to work on a car. You can learn that you need to take these bolts off and remove this part and put it back in like this. But what you can't learn is what happens when that bolt doesn't turn. What do I do then? What is the attitude that I need to have toward that bolt? What do I do exactly at that moment when I'm so angry that I want to smash in the windshield of this car with a large ratchet? What do I do at that moment? You see, there's a lot of things you can only gain, and you know this from all kinds of things that you have learned from other people. You can only gain by having your life connected with somebody else's life in the mission of doing that, doing a project together. And so as we did this, my dad got me started, and I eventually would go on much further than he had ever gone with automotive work and repair. So anyway, we swapped the engines, and then I tried to drive it home. My mom and my dad lived separate places. I tried to drive it home, and the new engine that we put in blew up on the way home. Oh, sad, right? So this is my MO. When something bad happens, I dig in deeper, okay? So I said, that's it. I'm going to read. I'm going to learn everything. I've never seen anyone do this before, but I'm going to rebuild this engine. And I actually started on, it's a bit of a long story. I started another car, rebuilt a whole nother engine sort of as practice to rebuild this engine. Show the engine up there. This is the engine in the Datsun 620, and I know that's probably kind of a meaningless picture to most of you. When I look at the picture of this engine, a whole period of my life floods back to me. Feelings, deep memories, emotions, all kinds of things. Okay, go back to the car because that'll probably give them more information than just the engine. All right, so what happens then is after I've rebuilt a whole nother engine as practice for this car, I go back to my dad's house the summer of my grade 12 year. So just before I'm going into grade 12. And we rebuilt this entire engine. Okay, we took it out again. I dismantled the whole thing. I had the block, you know, you have like a chemical cleaning done on the engine block, like every piece. I restore this entire thing. I painted the engine Datsun blue. Like the thing was beautiful. I don't actually have a picture of it, which is sad. It was beautiful. The trick is, when you have rebuilt an engine, it is sometimes not very straightforward to get the engine to start for the first time. Okay? And so what happened is, once I had this thing all the way back together, I tried to get it to start. And back then, you know, cars had a mechanical distributor. The timing was all mechanical. And so it was a little bit of an art form to get that in just the right place for the engine to start. And I spent almost 2 weeks of that summer, and I was running out of time, so I had to go back to school trying to get it to start, and I couldn't. I couldn't get the engine to start. And then eventually the next summer I tried, still couldn't get it to start. I'd spent 2 summers trying to get this engine to start. Finally, I went off to college and came back the summer after my first year in college and tried everything. I'd started in an engineering track, so I thought, oh, I know all this stuff. Trying to get this engine to start, I couldn't get it to start. And here's the thing that I wouldn't do at that time in my life. I wouldn't ask anyone for help. I didn't think that I was arrogant or that I had a problem learning from other people, but I really, really did. My dad probably was the only one who could have gotten me to do a project like that at that time. And even my dad, as soon as we got into this project, I started trying to go beyond him, on learning on my own. And so finally, after I had tried for 3 years to get this brand new engine to work, I decided I must have made some fatal error. Okay, I must have made some error internal to this engine and it's just never going to work. And I sold the car. Now, I had people in my life, actually now that I look back, who could have come alongside me and showed me just how to do it. And I didn't ask them, and I wasn't open to them helping me. The day after I sold it, I sold this brand new thing. I sold the car for like $150 because it didn't run. The day after I sold it, the guy drives it back to my house. He drives it up to my door. It's purring like a kitten. It's running just beautiful and perfect. He smiles and waves and drives on. All right, that's one of the most embarrassing, maybe not even embarrassing, gut-wrenching moments of my life, all because I was stuck and I wouldn't ask for help. In fact, I didn't know how to ask for help. That's been a huge problem in my life. We're going to learn some about that today. We're in the middle of a message series right now called Living in Community, Change the World. And today, what we're looking at, the message today is going to be about learning from a mentor. And the purpose of this series that we're looking at is, okay, Jesus and his group of disciples, he took a group of men, we talked about this 2 weeks ago, he took a group of guys who never naturally would have been friends. They would have been enemies, actually. The most diverse group maybe that you could imagine in that culture, that time and place. And he taught them by his personal presence, by his example, by mentoring. He taught them actually how to live together in him, in God. And because of what he did, that living together, that experience changed them deeply. They were not just Christians in name. They were not just followers of Jesus in name. They became like him to a significant degree. And because of that, as they became like him together, they were able to do that with other people. And eventually they changed the world dramatically. Dramatically. We talked about the last 2 weeks, just how much has changed. And we're going to keep talking about that throughout this series. Just how much has changed. What would it have been like to live in a world where people thought being selfish and getting the best of other people was actually the right way to be? Not just that people did that, but that was actually admirable and the very best. Jesus completely changed the way that we think about what's good. And because of that, the whole modern world has kind of come in all of its glory and some of its tragedy that it still remains because of sin. But this wasn't what Jesus didn't set out to change societies. He set out, and in fact, you can't change the world. You can't change the world or societies by trying to change the world and societies. This is one of Jesus' greatest points, is that the only way you can change the world is by starting with an individual human being. What's wrong is on the inside. And the only way to get at that is to use the power of God through his community, through a community of people living together for God. By the power of his Spirit, you begin to change what's on the inside of a person. When what's on the inside of a person has changed, now that person can begin to change the world around them. It can't work the other way around. And so we saw, for example, let's put up John 17:23. This is a verse Jesus is praying for all of us, actually, who would follow him later. John 17:23, and we see this is what he says. May they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me and that you love them as much as you love me. This is our key verse for this series because here we see Jesus' strategy. How did he change the world? Here's how he does it. He unites people in him. Okay? God loves you. He created you. The world is full of sin. People have turned away from God. Jesus died to set you free. He died so you could be forgiven and have a relationship with God, but you have to respond. You have to give up your own life and then enter into life with him. And that life, he has provided other people to help you along the way. What we're going to see today as we go through this, learning from a mentor, we're going to see how Jesus mentored his disciples. We're actually going to use that story of the Lord's Prayer, which most of you know. The Lord's Prayer, so our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. The story that goes around that, his disciples longing to learn how to pray. We're going to look at Luke chapter 11 and then Matthew chapter 6. And we're going to see exactly what Jesus does in those moments and how he was able to change his disciples over time as they lived together. And then we're going to see that Jesus, not only did he mentor his disciples, but he sent them out, like we talked about 2 weeks ago. He sent them out to mentor others, to build these little communities. And this is what eventually becomes what we call the church. That's what the church is. Our mission here, we are Community of Hope Church, and our mission is to help people grow in their relationship with God and with each other. That's nothing more than the mission of Jesus. That is his mission. But how is it accomplished? It's accomplished through deep community, unity, through other people, actually. You are, if you have given your life to Christ, you are his disciple. You are his follower. You are learning from him. He is creating in your life sort of a course of instruction, if you will, that will help you become more and more like him. But you also need living examples, flesh and blood around you, and he has actually provided those people for you. And so we're going to be talking about why you need mentors in your life, how you can find a mentor, and then what you should do with that mentor, what exactly it looks like. So let's go through first. We'll talk about 3 roles in intentional relationship. Jesus, in fact, built an intentional community. This is the first point for your bulletins. Jesus built an intentional community. He made a plan and he put it into action. So when we look at Jesus with his disciples and he's gathering them to him, that isn't just Jesus decided to form a club. Jesus decided to have a social time with some people. This is very intentional. And as he gathers these people around him, he's putting them into specific relationships with each other and with him that will enable them to grow. The whole thing is planned out by him. We saw his strategy 2 weeks ago, and we saw his strategy last week with Peter. He is friends with them. That's extremely important. He is friends with them. He loves them, and they grow to love him. It's not a superficial or a professional relationship. It's not like Jesus is just doing counseling with them or something like that. But Jesus has a plan for these relationships. It's not just they're my friend and whatever, we'll let whatever happen, happens. So there are 3 kinds of relationships that are part of this plan that Jesus has. Mentoring relationships, student relationships, and peer-to-peer relationships. These are part of Jesus, and we'll be talking about these 3 kinds of roles more and more as we go along in this series. We'll be in this series for 4 more Sundays after today. So these 3 kinds of relationships. So a mentoring relationship, this is where someone who is further along in some area of following after Christ spends time with someone else who needs to grow in that particular area for the purpose of helping them grow. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, seeing how exactly that works. Student relationship. We'll be talking about this today. Of course, this is the flip side of the coin. You are, in this case, you are the one who needs a mentor. You're the one who is stuck in some area, just like I was stuck in knowing how to get that engine to start, right? I was stuck and I could not move forward. I could not move forward without another person who could model that for me, who could be there with me to do it. And of course, I was a stubborn mule and did not reach out. Don't be like me. That's the key there. Okay, so student relationship, we'll be looking at that today too. And then as we go further along, we'll be looking at peer-to-peer relationships. So God has also provided and wants you to have close friends in your life who are similar to you, in a similar level to you in following Christ. How far they progressed, how long they've been following Christ, maybe their age. These people he's provided for you in your life, but not just to be friends, but to intentionally strengthen each other and encourage each other to move forward with God. Okay? So let's talk about for a minute why it is that you need a mentor. You need a mentor. In fact, you need many mentors in your life. This is part of God's plan for your life. And as I'm trying to hold myself back a little bit on this, because my experience with this is I'm almost yelling. If I yell at you and try to get you to believe this strongly, I'm really just yelling at myself, because it's taken me a long, long time to grab hold of this. You need a mentor. You will get stuck over and over again in places where you cannot grow past unless you allow other people deeply into your life. Other people who are following Christ, you allow them to come close so that they can see and help you. You need many mentors. If you wanted places in the Bible, well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time proving that from Scripture, from the Bible today. You can see that in the way Jesus sets up things with his disciples. But if you wanted to find a place, you could go to Ephesians 4, where there's an outline of how the church is supposed to work and what the different gifts are supposed to do and what they're for. You could go to 1 Corinthians 12, where Paul describes us, the church, the followers of Jesus, as a body, and how we have all these different parts, and those parts are all necessary. Why? To build each other up so that the whole body can reach the place that it's supposed to get to and then perform the mission it's supposed to perform in the world. Without those other people in the right ways in your life, it's not going to happen. It's not just you and Jesus. If that's the way you approach your relationship with God, you will grow to a certain point and then you will stop. You will grow to a certain point and then you will stop. You can also think about why we need a mentor. Just think for a minute about how it is with other people in your life. Have you ever noticed how you and others around you in certain people's lives can see what's wrong with that person? Can see the places that a certain person needs to grow really, really clearly, but that person themselves can't see it. Have you ever noticed that? That happens over and over again. Someone will have a major, glaring character flaw. Maybe they're totally unforgiving. Maybe they gossip. Maybe they're short with people. Maybe they're really stingy. They're not generous. Maybe they struggle with anger. And everyone around them can see it. Like it's the clearest thing in the world. It's the elephant in the room. It's staring them in the face. But that person really has no idea. Or they think their problem is not nearly as bad as it is. Now, if that's true of everyone else around you, don't you think it's true of you too? That's the challenge here. You need other people often even just to see what the next step is, to see where you need to grow. And this is part of the reason that we get stuck. And so, the second point in your bulletin here, you will get stuck without a mentor and never become what you could be. Without a mentor, you will get stuck and you will never become the person that you could be, the person that you were created to be. You will get stuck. All right, now let's dive in and take a look at how Jesus does it. He is our example. He's the pioneer. He's the one who knows. Let's look at how he does it. We're going to start here in Luke chapter 11. I'm going to read just the first verse for you here. We're going to break it down. Luke chapter 11, verse 1. When Jesus had finished praying, one of his disciples said to him, "Lord, teach us to pray, just as John taught his followers to pray." Lord, teach us to pray, just as John taught his followers to pray. Now, you might not think there's a whole lot in that verse, but there is. Do you see it? This verse shows us actually a ton about what Jesus' strategy is. First of all, they have seen Jesus praying. That tells us an enormous amount about his relationship with them and what it was like. And all the rest of the stories in the Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the Bible, demonstrate this. Jesus spent a whole bunch of time with his followers, with those he was mentoring. He spent a ton of time with them, and they spent that time for particular purposes. He spent a ton of time with them praying. They had seen, these men who were around him, they had seen the true Jesus, who he really is, at his most honest, his most vulnerable, they had seen him in prayer to God his Father. Now, as I was thinking about this, moving toward this message over the last couple of weeks, it struck me that this is one of the most intimate things. We often in the church pray together, but really to see the true life of prayer that's in another person. That's something that really comes only when you are very deeply connected with that person in a close relationship. There's only a few people, less than one hand of people, who I actually know what their deep life of prayer is like. Because I've been around them enough. I've been around them that much. This is what Jesus does with his disciples. So number one, he spent a ton of time with them, and that time is intentional. He's showing them his real self. He's not putting up a front. He's not pretending to be someone he's not. In fact, Jesus never did that. But this is something we need to hear. He's being real with them and showing them the depth of his life. Then number two, you see how we don't have, the Lord's Prayer is what's going to come next, but you see how Jesus waits for it. He waits for it, doesn't he? They have seen his life of prayer, and because they're on the same mission that Jesus is on, because they want to become like him, seeing his life of prayer has inspired them. When they've seen the depth of prayer in this man, they want nothing more than to become like him in that area. And Jesus has waited for that to happen before he speaks. He doesn't walk up to random people on the street or to people who aren't ready to hear from him and say, okay, I'm going to download to you the greatest prayer in the world right now. Are you ready for it? And gives them a lecture that they would then walk away from and not remember. He waits until they're ready to hear. And this is the second way that Jesus is operating. He's waiting for teachable moments. And those of you who are parents especially know that this is the only way that you can really help people. You can't help people by just blurting out all the good stuff that you know as fast as you can when they're not ready to hear. You can only help them when they're ready, when they're open, when they're looking for it. And so Jesus has waited until his disciples are longing for him to teach them, until they ask for him to teach them how to pray. And then he gives his instruction. The next thing that Jesus does, of course, if we read on, the next thing that he does is he gives them very clear teaching. You can see that he's been waiting for this. You can see it because he's ready. He doesn't just say, oh, well, you know, you got to pray, and here, he is ready with the Lord's Prayer to bust out of his mouth as soon as they ask this question. He's probably been waiting for months or years for them to ask this question. And he says that you pray exactly like this. Ready? Our Father in heaven, help us. I'm going to read it in a little bit different version so that that strikes you a new way. Father, help us to honor your name. Come and set up your kingdom. Give us each day the food we need. Forgive our sins as we forgive everyone who has done wrong to us, and keep us from being tempted. He goes on to give several more sections of teaching, illustrations of how they should pray, how they should be diligent in prayer, they should keep on going no matter what, how they should have faith in prayer, how they should be really bold in prayer. At the moment when they are teachable, he attacks with everything he's got. And he teaches them how to pray. And then, if we move, we'll turn now into Matthew, which records a very similar instance where Jesus is teaching the same prayer to his disciples. Notice here, he's teaching it to them over and over again. They don't get it after the first time. In fact, even after the 3 years that Jesus spent with his disciples, on the very night he's going to be arrested, he spends that whole night in prayer, and what happens to them? Come on, yell it out. They fall asleep. Yeah, just like maybe some of us sometimes do in church. Yeah. So they fall asleep. They still have not learned it. But Jesus is still confident that his strategy is going to be highly effective. So in Matthew chapter 6, we see a little bit more of what Jesus does when he teaches them how to pray. This is starting at chapter 6, verse 6. When you pray, he says, go into a room alone and close the door. Pray to your Father in private. He knows what's done in private, and he will reward you. When you pray, don't talk on and on as people do who don't know God. They think God likes to hear long prayers. Don't be like them. Your Father knows what you need before you ask. So you can see in this section, Jesus is actually not only giving them a teaching, but giving them an assignment, isn't he? He's waited. He's lived life with them. He's built a deep relationship. Then he's waited. He's shown them his deep life of prayer. He's waited for them to want it. As soon as they do, he's given them very clear teaching that he's prepared way ahead of time. He's given them very clear teaching that they'll remember for the rest of their lives because they were ready for it on how to pray. And then he gives them assignments to go and pray. He tells them, now here's what you're going to do. You go off by yourself. Because lots of people pray and when they're praying, all they're really thinking about is what are the other people in the room thinking about my words? Don't raise your hand how many of us have experienced that. You're praying and suddenly you realize I'm not actually talking to God. I'm just thinking about what the other people are thinking about my great words. So Jesus gives them an assignment that's designed to break that pattern. And he sends them off to pray by themselves. If you have a life of prayer that's on your own, our main point today is not prayer, but if you have a life of prayer that's on your own, you and God, then that will enable you to pray with other people in a way that's still authentic to God. And this isn't where Jesus stops either. We saw 2 weeks ago, he very quickly, even way before any of us might say that his disciples were ready for it, he very quickly sends them out. He sends them out just poof into the world to go find people and pray with them. Find people of peace. Go into the villages where I'm about to go. And when you find people, when you enter someone's house, you're going to pray with them. You're going to speak a blessing of peace over their house. And if it's a person who's ready to receive it, you see how he's teaching them to do exactly what he did with them. If it's a person who's ready to receive it, then stay with them. Live with them. Show them your life of prayer. And he then immediately tells us why that is. Because the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Jesus is using his disciples, who he has trained then, to go find more people and train them to become what he is, what he has made his disciples in part to be. You see, and then he even goes a step further. We saw in Luke, he sends out 72. Those 72 are people that his disciples found the first time. And he's brought them back. They've received training from his men, from Jesus. They've had this life-on-life mentoring, and now they're going to go out and find even more. This is very explicitly, very directly from Jesus. This is his plan to take over the world. This is it. A lot of other people decided to try it with armies. They decided to try it with economics, with money. Jesus' strategy is the only one that works. It's still going. It's still working. He has been so successful. It's a kind of unbelievable how successful he's been, except that we live in it every day. Okay, let's talk a little bit now. So we've seen this example from Jesus, all right? Let's talk a little bit now about what that might look like for us today, and then how we could find a mentor, if you've been convinced today that you actually need one. What this could look like today, it could look like an intentional mentoring relationship. I can think of, it's something that takes a long time, and it takes both a willingness from the person who is mentoring and a willingness from the person who is being mentored. It actually takes both. I think of a few examples in my life. One example would be a guy I met, this is probably 5 years ago now, and he came and he was hungry for the Word of God. He was hungry to know God more. But at the same time, his big struggle was that he felt condemned. He had this deep feeling, a deep understanding that he was sinful, deep understanding that he'd done things wrong against God, and he couldn't come to the place where he could believe. This is where he was stuck. He couldn't come to the place where he could believe that God could actually forgive him. He couldn't come to the place where he could forgive himself, so he wouldn't be baptized. He wouldn't move forward. So what we did was we met every single week. We talked about the things that were going on in each other's lives. We tried to show each other our real selves. And then as we talked about the things in his life, we would point out exactly, I would point out to him where he needed to believe the scripture, trust God in what he says, forgive himself because Jesus has already forgiven him. And this took a long time. It actually took about 2 years of doing this with this guy before it finally sunk in that he could, and he got past this point, that he could really believe that God had forgiven him. It's because he had someone walking with him. I want to show you something now. We're going to back up in the slides a little bit. I want to show you something now. And this is from a book that I think it describes the process here that Jesus is going through with his disciples and that we need to do with others and need to have done with us from mentors in our lives. And this is from a book called Exponential, which is a very good book. Dave Ferguson, he's a church leader in the Chicago area. And I don't think he made this up because it's actually really simple. But it's going to show you, I think it's going to bring to maybe more modern language for us exactly what Jesus is doing with his disciples. And it goes like this. It starts out, I do, you watch, we talk. Let's put that slide up. This is what Jesus does with his disciples. I think this makes it really simple for us. He starts out like this. He does stuff. Okay? Prayer was just an example. He does stuff and he lets his disciples really watch it and really understand what's going on. And then he talks with them. The next step is this. I do, you help, we talk. He keeps on doing this stuff. With his disciples, it's all kinds of things. It's not just prayer. It's ministering to people. It's healing people. It's helping people who are poor. It's giving. It's all these things. He continues doing it, and now he brings his disciples in and lets them help in the process. And then he keeps on talking with them. Keeps on talking about what things they did right, what things they did wrong. The next step is you do, I help, we talk. You see, now it's shifted. You can see this at the point in Jesus' ministry where he starts baptizing lots of people. Do you remember who baptizes the lots of people? Is it Jesus? No, it's his disciples. He brings them in actually as the primary workers in that situation. And then when he sends them out as well, you do. You're the one doing it now. But he's there a lot of that time helping them. And then he talks to them. Then he stops helping them. You do, I watch, we talk. And then he sends them out on their own to do it with other people. You do, someone else watches, and you talk. This is super simple, but the way that it's stated, I think just brings it so clearly to us what it is we're supposed to be doing in these intentional relationships with each other. What is it that we're supposed to be doing in these intentional relationships with each other? Now let's talk about for a few minutes, if you've been convinced, how is it that you can find a good mentor? And I want to say two main things here. In order to find a good mentor, the first is this. To find a good mentor, you have to be a willing student. That's your bulletin point number 3. I spent a long time in my life belly aching to God about the lack of mentors in my life. I spent a long time saying to him, I just don't understand. I want a mentor. I pray for a mentor. I want to grow in these certain areas, and I'm stuck, and I can't get past them. And there's nobody that you're putting into my life that can do that can help me. Now, first of all, God has provided for me everything that I need. He's the one who's in control. This is what Scripture says. He's provided everything that I need. So part of my belly aching was simply unbelief. And it was motivated actually by, in me, a great arrogance that I could not see as arrogance at the time. I was so focused on myself and thinking that I could figure things out on my own that I actually was not really open to people speaking into my lives. And whenever someone would come into my life who might have been a mentor to me in one area or another, I would look at the faults that are in their life and then discount them and push them out of my life. I would say because they're not perfect, because they're not Jesus, I can see this, and this in their life that's not up to par. That person cannot be my mentor. And guess how many human beings I excluded from being mentors in my life with that process? Every single human being in the whole world. That's who I excluded. But I couldn't even see it for years. I think I was, in some ways I'm still struggling with this, but I have come to the point now where I have many mentors in my life. Many. And this is what we got to realize, that when we're looking for a mentor, we're not looking for Jesus. When Jesus says, come, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, that's still a reality now. When you turn to follow him, you're becoming a follower of Jesus, not a follower of any human being who's here on earth with us right this moment that we can see. But part of the process that Jesus has us in, he's put all these people around us to help us. So here's what we got to accept. Number one, that you can't be arrogant about this. You got to be a willing student. You got to be open to people who are not perfect, who you might even be ahead of in some areas, but who are ahead of you in other areas. You got to be open to them actually speaking into your life and having that kind of an intentional relationship with you. You got to be a willing student. And you got to realize, too, you got to search for mentors. Ask him for it. Pray for them. But then accept what he's given you. Because here's the reality. All the mentors that you need are already in your life right now or within reach. They're within reach. All the mentors you need, God has provided. Maybe you don't like them. But then you've got an argument with him, not with me or those mentors. And so we got to accept what God has provided. And this mentoring experience will not always be easy. It will take a long time. We're going to continue talking about this next week. We're going to move next week into looking more from the mentor side. How do you find people to mentor? What should a mentor be doing? What kind of attitude should they have as they mentor other people? But I just want to leave you today with a couple of challenges as we close out today. First of all, recognize that there are people within your reach that God has placed there to help you become more like Christ. I would challenge you to recognize that. And then, once you really believe it, I challenge you to reach out to them and to be a willing student. Here at Community of Hope Church, we have groups, we have community groups, we have classes, we have tons of opportunities where you are actually in close contact with people who can help you get past the places that you're stuck. It's going to take a willingness from those people, but it's also, I'm thinking of you now as the person being mentored, the student. It's going to take a willingness from you to believe it, to walk into it, and to stay in it. Let's pray. We'll continue in